Now, Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon.
Welcome to this episode of Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. Joining me on the phone, it is a former Yes singer, Jon Anderson. He is back with a new album called Thousand Hands, Chapter 1. And if it sounds familiar, yes, the album was originally released in March of 2019, and we did an interview at that time, but it is being re-released at the end of July, well, now basically. And so we do interview part 2. And on the phone, as always, it is the one, the only, the affable and huge Kiss fan, Alan Niven. Bonjour.
Bonjour. Did you say affable or affable?
I said affable.
Both apply.
Yes, that's the one.
Both apply.
Yes.
Jon Anderson. Yes,
Sweet
one
man.
says. Yes.
Sweet,
What a great
sweet
name for a band. What a great name for a disposition about life in general. And this record has got an incredible contribution and lineup.
The cast of characters is
Cast of characters. But I got to tell you, my favorite Jon Anderson record has got nothing to do with Yes, and it is something that he did with someone else. He made a record in the 90s, early 90s, called Dream, with a Japanese artist called Kotaro. And if you're into Yes and you're into Jon Anderson's voice, and if you know Kotaro, and if you don't know the record, it's an absolute must-have.
well, I'm actually not very familiar with that record. And in fact, as I'm looking through his discography, I can't. Oh, here it is. Jon Anderson discography. What was it called? Deseo?
Dream. It's called Dream.
And
It's Jon Anderson and Kotaro.
Well, I don't see it on his. Anyway, but I'm glad because it is. Jon is always pleasant. I mean, he is just such a great voice and such a great character. And this new album, as you were mentioning, there is a cast of characters on it. I mean, listen to this. We've got Jean-Luc Ponty, Chick Corea, Jonathan Cain, Chris Squire, Rick Derringer, Stuart Hamm, Alan White, Larry Coryell, Steve Howe, and it goes on and on and on. I mean, just a wonderful, wonderful collaborative effort by all of them.
Jon Anderson always struck me as being a very positive spirit. You know, there's something kind of elf-like about him, and he was of the positive spirit. And you always had the sense that was the motivation behind his creativity and his musical exploits. And, when I read on the computer that various bands are taking what is referred to as PPPP or whatever, you kind of wonder if that indicates what drives them and their motivations. I mean, I have to say that I think it's a little on the nose for certain bands whose names I won't mention, like Guns N' Roses,
Right.
taking $1 million of taxpayer money because they didn't make that much in the previous 2 years circling the globe and extracting every dime out of every promoter that they could bend over a table. I mean, come on, guys, look after your own and let the taxpayer dollars go to who it should go to. It was like that guy who was appealing for people to put money into his restaurant, and then you find out that his name, being German Otter, that he is directly related to a superstar called Lady Gaga. Maybe your daughter might help you out rather than you taking taxpayer dollars. I mean, come on, people. Where's your social conscience? You don't have to be a pure positive spirit like Jon Anderson, but you don't have to be a putz either.
Well, let me, and I don't want to play devil's advocate, but I just want to throw out the questions, and I'm not challenging you on this, but I just want to know, when you're a band, Guns N' Roses, Sammy Hagar is another one who took some of the money, and they have their own personal fortune, but they run these entities as companies. It's Guns N' Roses Inc., it's Sammy Hagar Inc., or it's probably they probably have more creative names than that.
Let me stop you right there.
Right? Okay.
Let me stop you right there. Just because you form an LLC, and I will guarantee that these PPP payments these bands are taking I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same accounting firm handling it all, taking their 10% and doing the paperwork and driving the paperwork through the government offices, so that they get their little commission or their 10% commission. $1 million, that's a lot of 10% right there. Just because you have a company, that doesn't absolve you from a sense of the appropriate or the sense of being cool or the sense of having a social awareness. If you've got pots and pots of money, don't you feel a bit bad about taking money that could go to lots of little businesses that really need it? And there are plenty of people who are not getting their unemployment. There are plenty of people who have been left short of government help. But armed with a great accounting firm, these bands can go in there and get their money, and they're sitting on piles. It just speaks of greed. I used to work with this band whose bass player was a devout punk. He was all about righteousness. I wonder what he did with his share of the $1 million. If you can look after your own people, you look after your own people. And if you can contribute to society by not taking money that can be used by people who really need it, then you do it. You don't just stick your hand out like an LA greedhead.
Well, okay. Yes, I fully agree. And again, I'm just going to try to play some devil advocate just for conversation's sake. But you look at Sammy Hagar, and he's probably got merchandisers and computer guys and roadies, and you're probably looking down at 1,000, 2,000.
Do you know what he sold his tequila company for?
Like 120 million or something.
Yeah.
Something like that. I mean,
exactly.
Yes, but is it up to
how
sort of
much is enough?
Well, no,
Here's the
true.
point. How much is enough? Now, I'm saddled with the fact that I'm an old curmudgeon. And being an old curmudgeon, I was a little bit aware during a period of time when there was a magical sense of social revolution in the air. There was even a song called Something in the Air by Thunderclap Newman that kind of described the sensation and the moment. And people like Graham Nash are writing songs like We Can Change the World. What a delightful and naive attitude he had. But, you know, in that moment, there was a sense that the world could be changed and people's consciousness could evolve and grow a little bit, and that people would be a little less self-serving, a little less fearful, a little less greedy. But it appears to me now that, no, the magic bus doesn't run anymore. Ken Kesey's bus is rotting in the woods, and we're back to devil take the hindmost, live and let die.
Yeah,
I want mine.
I'm reading it in front of me here. So the PPP program, for those that don't know, because in Canada, I don't really know what it is. It's an American thing, but it is the Paycheck Protection Program. And here is a list of bands receiving at least $150,000, which is
immense. It's immense. Listen,
for some people, that's 3, 4, 5 years' salary. You know.
Yes. Just locally, while these guys have got their hands stretched out, and God knows that they've got enough pillowcases that they can stuff another $1 million under their bed and under their mattress. But for example, I know of a small local company that handles rentals, and people aren't paying their rent, and that means income is not coming in, and they still have to do maintenance. Maintenance for them the other day included removing a suicide from one of their residences. And these people can't get a penny out of PPPP. But
some of these bands are poor. Let me look at this list. Come on, let's do this list.
Plenty for Slash to go and buy another Lamborghini. I mean, I just think it's egregious. And if I were advising musicians of success, I'd be saying, for God's sake, how much is enough? I mean, you know, the famous David Geffen answer when he was asked, how much is enough? And he turned around and said, I want it all. Well, he sent the world the biggest fuck you could imagine by taking a drone picture of his yacht, swanning around in the Caribbean,
saying he's
making
safe.
comments.
That's my favorite
Saying
COVID
he's
moment. That was so obnoxious.
Absolutely. And I had one or two people who were going, well, David really didn't understand. And I said, no, fuck you. David totally understood. I know David to a certain degree, having dealt with him for a while. And that was utterly deliberate. That was the biggest fuck you that he could give to everybody. I win. You die. Live and let die.
That was a very obnoxious moment at the beginning of this. But let's see. The Eagles took money, which makes sense. They're poor. Cheap Trick. Well, listen, they're a theater act, so they probably needed it. Sammy Hagar, listen, he's all by himself. The poor guy. Guns N' Roses, Green Day. Oh, here's the one that offends me, and I'm actually offended by this name, Pearl Jam. These socialist baiting, blah blah blah. We're all for the people, fuckers. And then they're like, oh, free money from the government. Excuse me, Pearl Jam. Fuck off. No offense. Nickelback took some, and people go, aren't they Canadian? It's like, yeah, but they probably have a Delaware corporation. Anyway, Slipknot,
Yes,
Disturbed, Seven Dust. Well, Seven Dust I can understand. To be fair, Seven Dust is probably not rolling in millions and millions of dollars, and they probably needed.
Do you know what I'd find curious?
Pearl Jam.
I'd find it curious to know how many of these people share an accountant, because to me this is. I think it's as much accountant driven that they picked up the phone and said, we can make this claim on your behalf, and they're taking their commission on it. And I would be very curious to know how many of them share an accountant.
And just looking at the news here, it says that the arts, entertainment, and recreation industry as a whole received 1.53% of all PPP loans.
Mm.
So there you go. So 2% of the bundle went to God. Anyway, let us get over to Jon Anderson because
there's a positive.
There's a positive.
I'm willing to bet you that if somebody turned around to Jon Anderson and said, "Do you want some PPP?" whether he needed it or not, he'd have said no.
Yeah,
Let it go to people who really need it.
Yes, and I found the album Dream. It's actually an album by Kotaro that featured vocals by Jon Anderson. I was looking in the Jon Anderson discography going, is Alan wrong? Is he thinking of a different, but no, here it is.
Am I ever wrong?
No, not in this case. It says, Dream is an album by Japanese New Age musician Kotaro, released in Japan in 1992 and re-released in 1997 on, guess what? Geffen Records.
Geffen Records.
Yep. So there you go.
I introduced Kotaro to Tom Zutaut. Actually, even before he worked at Geffen. So that was how Geffen were aware of who Kotaro was. Kotaro made extraordinary music, but Jon Anderson and Kotaro, great record. If you don't have it, find it.
Go buy it, yeah. And it's been re-released, so it should be available. If not, check out Discogs.com. That's where I go for all my hard-to-find records. But here he is, the one, the only, one of my favorites, Jon Anderson. We are speaking with the one and only Jon Anderson. The new album is 1,000 Hands, Chapter 1. And as we say in Montreal, bonjour, Monsieur Anderson. Comment allez-vous? How are you?
Very, 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 very good. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. You know, we spoke about this album 1,000. I keep wanting to say 100, but 1,000 Hands last year. It is being reissued later this year. Talk to me about this album and what makes it so special that you believe so much in it that you want to just make sure that it gets out there and that it gets the right push instead of just saying, okay, we gave it a shot in 2019. Let's make a new album for 2020. There's a great passion for this album that you have.
Well, it took a few years to actually finish the album, and it really felt like there's something about the tour we did, which we never got to Canada, which is really heartbreaking for me, because I only tour if I can go to Canada, and of course this time we stayed in America last year, And it was great working with these musicians who all live in Orlando. And they're sort of session musicians, and they're beautiful people, and they loved doing the show. And that's half the battle, is when the musicians really enjoy themselves. And performing the new songs, the audiences were great, and I just thought, well, let's just put it back out in the midsummer this year. And we got a record company to help promote it, and the usual thing, it's you make music in order to reach people and give people some enjoyment, and this is what this album does to me. Still, after, can imagine it was 30 years ago, I started recording 2/3 of the songs, and it's just a magical feeling to know that people are getting the chance to hear it again, or to be able to chance to get re-released. Never been done before, but why not?
Why not, indeed? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about its history, because you did mention that it has this 30 years sort of in the making process. Was it always sort of seen as a whole, where you had this album in mind and it just took time? Because, you were touring with Yes, and you were doing solo albums, you were doing other stuff. Was it always this one sort of piece of work that you saw, or are these songs sort of stitched together where you had a little bit here and a little bit there? Is it a complete effort in a sense? You know what I'm saying? And I'm not trying to be disparaging, but is it 11 individual tracks that you've had over 30 years, or did you always have a vision of, no, these are these songs that make this album?
Well, basically the 2/3 of the album we recorded in Big Bear in 1990. And then, like you said, you go on tour, you carry on doing other work, and I have a stockpile of ideas and music that just go back 40 years, 50 years, that I'm still trying to get finished. So it's nothing wrong with eventually the music being fulfilled and done and put out. But it just felt that the songs still lasted so many years in terms of listening to it in the studio. And then you put, Billy Cobham on one track and Jean-Luc Ponty on the same track called Come Up. And then we added Chick Corea, because he just lived around the corner from the studio. And all of a sudden, I think I told you the original idea of the album was to get a lot of people to perform on it that I really respect. And we just managed to get so many great people to work on the album. And it gives it a very fulfilling sort of identity as a piece of music, as an album of music. And I still enjoy listening to it after so many years. So I just hope people get the chance to hear it, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I agree. And I find it interesting that you have Steve on there, and you have Chris Squire, and you have Rick Derringer and Stuart Ham, and because they all give a different texture to the songs. Instead of being sort of 11 songs made by 4 guys in a room with all these different players on it, it really adds to the textures and the layers of each song. Talk to me a little bit about that, and especially having Alan on there and Chris on there, who have, and of course, Chris has passed on. What's it like to have those guys on there?
Actually, really, it just happened that when we were first recording in Big Bear, up in the mountains near LA, Chris and Alan were in LA, so I just went down with a couple of tracks and said, "What are you doing today, guys? Would you like to play on this? I will pay you lots of money." Well, it wasn't a lot of money, but it's just the idea that they were excited to play on it. And then years later, you listen to it and just think, oh my gosh, Chris, his bass harmonies were unique to my singing with Yes, of course. And Alan White, perfect drumming, and, Alan White played on John Lennon's Imagine album. So we were working with great people anyway. And thankfully they played on the album. The last guy that I put on the album was Steve Howe. And I haven't been in touch with Steve for many years. We're friends, we're musical friends, like brothers. But he takes his own way of making music. I have my own way of living life. And I just sent him this track called Now and Again. and I just felt it just missed something. And I just said, listen, Steve, if you have 5 minutes, just put some guitar on the track. And, because I actually sang on one of his albums, and he said he would repay me. And that was like 10 years ago. But I sang on his album. And so I said, could you do it? And he said, yeah, I'd love to. So when he played on that track, Now and Again, which is the end track of the album, I couldn't help but want to sing a little bit about, we used to do this all the time, Steve. We were really connected around Fragile and Close to the Edge, and the great times of the 70s with Yes. So it was such an honor to sing with him again.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I do want to talk about Yes, but at some point, or before we get there, I want to talk about Deborah Anderson, your daughter. She has this documentary, Women of the White Buffalo. One of my personal friends is a Mohawk who lives on a reserve here in Quebec, and so the story touches me. Talk to me a little bit about this film and contributing music to it and doing the theme song for it, and what does that mean given the current context of what's going on in the States and what's going on around the world about discrimination and racism and all kinds of stuff. It really is sort of a powerful piece she's put together.
It makes me cry every time I watch it. It's like, I'm so proud of Deborah because, we've obviously connected all the way through our lives together. She sang on nearly all my solo albums. And then off she goes and makes a movie here and a movie there and photographs people here and there. And then all of a sudden she jumps into that world, which it's a delicate place to go, really. I was very fortunate in 1986. I met a shaman, a beautiful man who lived in East LA called Long Walker. So I went along with this understanding that I was learning, and he was teaching, and I spent over 2 or 3 months with him on and off, and even went to Copper Canyon with him in Chihuahua in Mexico to realize this spring happening that was going on with the Tamarunian Indians. And I actually just jumped in head first into the belief that I need to know about Native American culture because I wasn't taught anything at school in England. And Deborah, bless her, she actually did the same thing 20, 30 years later. She actually went and spent time in that world. And I said to her just a month ago, thank you so much for walking in my footsteps, because she actually did something more about letting people know that we're all Indigenous people when we think about it. And I remember it so clear how Canada followed in the footsteps of Australia some years ago and asked for forgiveness for the terrible things that the Native Americans were put to. Gosh, terrible things. America, USA hasn't even got close to that. But, God bless Deborah. She actually made an incredible documentary and should be seen by as many people as possible. And there you go.
Yeah, and I agree. And I want to take it outside of the filmmaking thing, but into the creative process, because I find, obviously, that when you have a famous, rock star dad or mother or whatever, the kids often inherit that creative gene and that ability. So were you ever drawn to filmmaking? Did you teach her this? And did she think of having a singing career and she went into filmmaking? Because she did sing with you on those solo albums. How did you see that develop in her?
I was very, very surprised when one day she was complaining to me about, we were walking around LA, and she was complaining that she hadn't done anything yet, and she hadn't really got anywhere with her life. And I said, don't worry, everything will come when you just open up your heart and your soul, and things will come to you. And it's up to you to take that step and decide what is good for you. She actually made a movie. She was asked to go and do photographs with these porn stars in LA, and she went there just to take photographs. and finished up making a documentary about them because she was so enamored by their wonder, energy, their love of life and the way they have to live and all this kind of thing. And she made this movie documentary. I can't remember the name of it now, but it'll pop up in my head. But the fact that she went ahead and did that and then did some filmmaking for her friends, and she'd always send me a quick minute or two of what she was doing. And I just said, just open up and it'll come to you. And of course, it evolved into this wonderful, powerful documentary she's made now. So it's just one of those things. My son makes music every day and sends me emails. He lives in London. My youngest daughter is the most beautiful singer in the world, but she has 3 beautiful boys now. So she hasn't got time to sing. I was talking to her just last week about her, open up and sing every day. And she said, and she got her piano working, so she's going to do that. I said, good for you. So, children are a blessing anyway, and you learn from your children. And everybody knows that. Any father, family, people don't know, but you learn from your children because they teach you who you truly are,
Yeah, they really do. Let me talk to you about also the songwriting process. How do you approach songwriting? Now the songs on 1,000 Hands, as we know, have been sort of gestating for 30 years. But how do you approach songwriting now? Because when you look back to Fragile, or when you look back to the early, yes, there certainly was a sound. And then when we get to Owner of a Lonely Heart, it's certainly more, I don't want to say pop, but it's certainly more radio friendly. How do you approach songwriting now in 2020?
Every day I write a song. Every day I write music. It's in my nature to want to do really important things for me. I always say the great music is coming, And I saw a video of Jacob Collier in Montreal, and I said, that's the guy. That's the beginning of the next level of people in music. And it's true that there are great young musicians out there and they're going to make it work because, they don't need record companies in the sense, they don't need big business behind because they can put out their music on the internet. And that's what I do all the time. In my mind, I'm working on about 4 or 5 projects at the same time. And yesterday I got very sort of bogged down trying to figure out what I was doing because I just realized that I wasn't finishing anything. So I've got this momentum this morning was to finish something, and then a friend of mine sends me some music of the great piano player. I've got to see him checking out on the internet now. 1 second. He sends me this. I've got some music from. Here it is. Wait a second. And I'm singing on his music now. So it's this guy, Bruce Hornsby, who plays incredible piano. He's one of the great piano players. So I've just been this morning singing on his piano playing. And I've lost my train of thought. What I was going to do today was just get organized and try and get something finished on a large-scale project, which is the son of Elias. It's called Zamran, the son of Elias. I must have about 3 hours of music, and I can't seem to piece it together correctly. And I've got 3 or 4 different versions of the story. The storyline is very, very exciting to me, but the music is too big, kind of thing. So, when it comes down to just writing songs, you don't think about, I need to have a hit record. Because in the old days with Yes, I was watching a documentary about Close to the Edge yesterday, just people talking about it. And I realized that at that moment in time, having a hit record was the last thing in our mind. Well, last thing in my mind, that's for sure. Because we were on the verge of different experiences in music. And I was very, very fortunate to be surrounded by such great musicians as Steve and Rick and Chris and Bill Bruford. And then after we finished Close to the Edge, Bill Bruford left the band. It kind of freaked me out. And that's what life is all about,
Well, life is about changes. Well, okay, so let me ask you that. How did the lineup changes affect the band for you? Were you one of these guys that sort of saw Yes as, or any band that you were in, as here are the whatever, the four horsemen and we're going into battle? Or did the changes in lineups go like, hey, this guy's got new ideas. We're bringing in a fresh perspective. How did you feel about lineup changes?
Yeah, I think that was it. I've always said the same thing, that because we weren't from the same city, we were all from different parts of England. We met in London. We had no real family ties, like, oh, we've got to stick with the band, like the Animals or the Hollies or the Beatles. You don't do that when you're in a big city. You just work with whoever's available, and that's what happened. We actually started rehearsing Yes in this cellar underneath a cafe called the Lucky Horseshoe Cafe. And we started off, and there was 5 of us, and then the day after, the drummer left to go and join a band. He was going to get paid, which was kind of cool. So we had to look for a drummer. We found Bill Bruford. And, we only hired Bill Bruford because he said he had a Ludwig kit. Because, if he has a Ludwig kit, he must be able to play, Anyway, as time went along, people would not come up to rehearsals or get more involved in being the star of the show, or something dislocated members of the band somehow. And, me and Chris would look at each other and say, hey, we need to get a different keyboard player here because, it's not happening. And I say, yeah, I agree. So it wasn't always my idea to ask people to leave or get rid of them. It was always a collective within the band that said, what are we going to do now? Bill Bruford's just left the band, and Eddie Offord, who was our engineer at that time, said, look, I know this guy, Alan White. And we all looked at each other and said, you mean Alan White, who played on Imagine? And he said, yeah. And I think he'd like to join the band. So it just happened. And within 3 weeks, he was on tour with us. So things happen when you're not least expecting, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think at this point, some would argue that Alan is Yes's drummer in the sense that he's the defining sound, and it's amazing because a lot of times fans will go, oh, we want the original lineup, and yet you look at Alan and it's like, no, he's the guy. That's the guy we want. I want to ask you about Open in 2011. You put out this EP, this masterful piece of, I guess, 20, 25-minute work. And at the time you had described it as, I am writing more in the Yes style of music, which suggests two things. It suggests, A, that you had stopped writing Yes style music for a while, and I need to know why would you do that? And also, what sort of said in 2011, hey, you know what? All right, let me go back to what makes Yes style music. And so what is Yes style music? Talk to me a little bit about that moment or that epiphany in 2011.
Well, it just happened that I was playing my guitar, acoustic guitar that I have, and I was writing this idea, and then I had an introduction idea, which was very sort of Vaughan Williams, who's a great British composer. He had this beautiful chord structure. I tried to emulate it, not exactly the same, but emulate the idea, which led into the next part, and then the next part, and then another part. And then within a couple of 3 days, I'd written this piece, which was 20 minutes long. And I thought, well, this is how I did with Yes, because I remember dreaming topographic. I remember dreaming, close to the end. And dreaming the musical concept and having a middle section with an ocean of energy sound, and then this little song comes up in the middle. Close to the edge, I have this sort of shape in my head, and I just transferred it into the band, and Steve was my right-hand man with that because he helped to write. He actually wrote the words and the melody close to the edge, round by the corner, and then I wrote down at the end, round by the river. Then let's go to C, change the key. C, so we'll bounce back another chord. Okay, and then you do that with your musician friend, and all of a sudden we were writing this composition. But then the same with topographic. And then I actually sat down at the piano and started writing a terrible version of The Gates of Delirium because I was interested in being able to write a complete work for about 15, 20 minutes long. And that's when I got to Open was years, 30 years later that I sat back and started composing again. And I'm just composing now 4 20-minute works as we speak. And it's an incredible feeling that I'm doing something that I was doing 40 years ago. And it still feels, it's not going to sound like Yes. It's just going to sound like what it is. Open doesn't sound like Yes. It's just an orchestrated version of an idea that if I had musicians around me, I would try to recreate the Yes energy. But then I really need Chris and Steve and Alan, and everybody was doing all these other things 10 years ago, 12 years ago. So Open was just an idea that the door was slowly opening to composition. And now I'm sort of deep into composition with this next project, which I don't know what I'm going to call it, but I just have, you can actually listen to the blueprint. You can actually Google Jon Anderson Joyfulness YouTube.
Oh.
There are 4 pieces that I created about 6 months ago.
Oh,
Just 1 second.
Of course.
You always get the wrong number. You think I'm...
Every so often you get the wrong number. So let me just take up on this then. In terms of putting together a new piece of music, and I heard you describe it there, you seem very excited and very motivated to get this done. What keeps the excitement and the motivation? Because you could just easily go out and put your name on the marquee or with Trevor and whoever and just say music of Yes, and you go do Owner of a Lonely Heart and you play it 10 times and fans would show up. Why is it important to stay creative and stay active and make new music and not just sit back and go, I've done 40 years of new music. Now you're just going to hear the hits.
Gosh, I would never, I don't think that way. No, I'm always mesmerized by artists that keep going and keep challenging themselves musically, and I want to be part of that, forward-thinking sort of musician. Like there are so many. It's not an illogical thing to do. It's an artist. You want to create better music. You always want to do something better. You don't know if it's going to reach as many people, but it's just the way things are. I think I told you the story about Quebec. That my album did very well in Quebec, which was called City of Angels, whereas anywhere else in the world it didn't really do anything. And then I found out that it actually did very well in Quebec state. Province, and I thought, well, at least somebody liked the album because I thought it was a pretty good album. So when you're working on a longer form piece, like if you say, just Google Joyfulness, and there's 4 of them there with some beautiful visuals from a friend of mine in Ireland called Mike Byrne, and it's a blueprint. And the more I listen to it, I just put it on a USB and put it in my car, and I'd drive around listening to it, and I'd start imagining it being performed with a full orchestra, and maybe choir singing some song lyrics, and very much like Open. But here we are, many years later. That it won't evolve until next year sometime. But I've done my first draft of the 4 movements. I finished them last week, and it's taken me these 3 months that we've all been in quarantine to do it every day, and I've really got it all figured out. So that'll be my next project next year, and I don't want to go on tour and just like you say, go back and work with Rick and Tara and whoever. No, I've done that, and it was fun. But I want to do more new stuff. I don't know why.
Well, why not? I mean, when you're 40, 50 years into your career, at some point you just got to say, I want to do it my way. We've done it the other way. But I want to ask you, because you said that you're always trying to write better and a better song. And that sort of seems to be the dilemma of a lot of artists. And it's almost like they're tortured, where you'll have a great selling album in 1976 and you'll go, ew, it's still not the best I've ever done. Do you feel that? I mean, do you look back and say, I still haven't written the best album, I still haven't written the best song? Or do you accept that some of the stuff you've done is classic and timeless and you're just still writing? I mean, are you a tortured artist in that sense, if I can use those words?
No.
Okay.
Very,
good.
Very simply, no. Because I know what I went through involved in creating that. And I'm still going through the same process. It's not like I'm doing anything different. And when I did Open, I had a friend of mine who lives locally to do the orchestration, and he's going to work on this bigger project now. We're still in touch. I'm very open to working with different people. The internet is such an incredible tool to connect with musicians or work with musicians around the world. And I just sang a children's song for this Indonesian band just last week. They sent me this children's song that they recorded, and I sang harmonies on it and trying to learn Indonesian, which I have no idea what I'm singing about, but I know it's a children's song. And that's where I live. I'm very, very adventurous still.
Well, that's a good thing. But okay, so let me take you back to the first solo album real quick. Elias, I think I've always said it correctly. Elias of Sunhillow. I don't know. Sunhillow.
Yeah.
You know, you have Fragile. You've got Close to the Edge. You've got Tales. You've got Relayer. The band is on this non-stop sort of choo-choo train. Sorry for describing it that way. It just came to me. But you're there. How did you come around and say, hey, you know what? I just want to have a Jon Anderson voice, and I just want to put out these songs that are personal. And did it cause any friction with the band members? Or was it like, oh, good, we all need a break, go do it? How did that decision come about to say, hey, I'm just going to step out of the Yes thing for a bit and go do a solo album?
I think it started with Steve saying he was going to do a solo album, and then Alan said he was going to do one. And Chris said he was going to do one. I thought, well, I'd better do one as well. So I did the opposite of going to a studio and getting musicians in. I just said, I'm going to do it by myself. And then it's a pure solo album. And the reason why that happened was one of the first guys who ever worked with Yes was Tony Colton, who produced Time and a Word. And we were good friends. He was in a great band called Heads, Hands and Feet. And he came to my house one day around that period of time in 75 when he came in and started playing the piano as though I said, I didn't know you could play the piano. He said, oh yeah, I went to music school for 3 months. And I said, that's what I should do. Because I was very limited in terms of guitar, piano. I could just, play the white notes, which was kind of okay. So I thought to myself, that's what I should do. I will lock myself in the garage and learn all these instruments that I've been collecting for the last 2 years and create an album based on the album cover of Roger Dean with the ship in the sky. I think it's Fragile. And that's what I started to do. And I wrote the story of Elias, and it's the idea, very simple idea of how music came to the planet from the Pleiades. This energy came from the Pleiades to the planet, and it's not humans that brought it there, but definitive musical energies, which are the four main energies of music, which is the musical structure, then drums, and then bells and additional sounds, and then choir. It's just the way it works. So now I'm working on the Zamran experience, which is the son of Elias, is that when music came to the planet Earth was just ready for the ley lines. Now, I don't know if you know much about ley lines. You spell it Ley-Lines. Ley lines are all over this planet. They're crystal screens of energy. And where they come together in a sort of like a train station where all these streams of energy come together, above ground, you have a sacred site. This is all well known, and not that I didn't make it up. I'm just saying that's what I'm trying to negotiate musically, how the streams came together. How did they form? It was a musical energy that made them happen. And so I could get lost in what I was talking about now. So that's what I'm doing. Oh boy.
Yeah, well, that's good. Well, before we run out of time, I'll ask you two more questions, and we'll see where it goes from there. But with everybody running off and doing their solo albums at the time, was that a needed moment where everybody came back reinvigorated and okay, let's get over, and then eventually we get down the road to 91-25? Or was it sort of the beginning of fractures? I mean, because sometimes taking a break and doing your own thing feels great. Did everybody sort of come back and go, yeah, this is good?
It was a good idea to start with. And we've been solidly working for then probably 7 years without a break, real proper break. And we've done all these albums. And it was exhaustion had set in. And I think it was more Steve who mentioned it to Chris and then again to me and said, oh, we're thinking of doing our solo albums. And I just said, okay, that's cool by me. Unfortunately, my album took 2 months longer than expected because I got very involved in creating this music. And I don't think they were very happy with me at the end of that period. I know they weren't because the manager wanted to make more money. He got a tour in Japan. I said, guys, I've just spent 3 months without a break, and I need 2 weeks off before we go on tour. And it compounded the problem that managers rule by sort of making sure that nobody's happy.
Conquer and divide. Conquer and divide.
I know. So I learned that one.
Learned that one.
Life moves.
All right, let me, I see we're at 35 minutes and we had said we would stop at 40. So I just want to ask you this because we spoke about Quebec before. And of course, I'll bring it out to Canada. We have an artist back in the 1980s called Gowan. Folks now know him as Lawrence Gowan of Styx. But on his, I guess, second album, Great Dirty World, you ended up doing background vocals on some of his greatest songs, including Moonlight Desires. How did Jon Anderson of Yes, who were massive back in 1985, 86, 87, end up on sort of the local Canadian boys album? And I mean, looking back in 2020, you're like, well, it's Lawrence Gowan of Styx, calm yourself. But in 1987, he was the local Canadian guy.
Well, he was in the studio. I was working in a studio. I actually met somebody who had a studio in LA. I was living in Los Angeles. And so I went to work in the studio, and next door was the man. And he was recording a proper album. So I was going and listened to it. And then he said, would you mind singing on it? I said, I'd love to. So I just sang on it. And that was it. It was just like, okay, I'll get on with what I'm doing next door. And nice to see you, man. Take care, and that kind of thing. And I think it's about a month later, he asked me to go to Mexico and be in the video of the single. And I said, okay, I will dress up as a Toltec. Totally. with gold hair and stand on top of a pyramid. Okay, I'll do that. Things you do for fun, you know.
Just by the way, it's such a great song and just sort of cool because, you know, you look back, for example, in Bryan Adams' career when he was just, you know, Brian, just some guy. Lou Gramm was in a studio next door, and he ended up on and it's just kind of nice that artists like yourself, like Lou, would embrace these sort of Canadian rookies at the time and say, all right, I'll come help you out. Thousand Hands will be released by Blue Elan Records on 180 gram double vinyl, coming out on July 31st. The CD, just real quick, is the album retouched or remixed or remastered or reimagined, or is there a fresh coat of paint on it? Or if they were lucky enough to get it last year on your website, anything different about this version?
I don't think so. It should be exactly the same. That's all I know.
Well,
I did some artwork and some part of my story. So people who get the first 1,000 albums get this painting that I did, plus a story from my memories, my memoirs, and things like that. You know, the little promotional things, you know.
Which is cool. I find that cool. And here we go. Last question. It was produced by Michael Franklin. Just what does he bring to the project? And also, being in the business for so many years, why not just self-produce it and just say, hey, I know what I'm doing in the studio. What's the importance of having sort of an outside vision, an outside set of ears to look over the album and say, hold on, what did Michael bring to it?
I think quite a lot. To me, it was like he wanted to do it, so I just said, okay, set up the tapes. I sent him I had the 24 tracks in my garage, and I sent them to him, and he went through them and printed them up and sent me some of the work he was doing on it. I was mesmerized how good he was and how inventive he was. And then when it came to the final sort of mixing and that, he was very, very open to listen to ideas that I had. And, you know, through the internet, he'd send me a track and I'd listen and go, okay, could you just take the drums up a little bit on this song, please? Because Billy Cobham. And I said, I want to really hear everything he does, you know, not the drums sitting back. So they brought it up. And then he put Chick Corea on, come up, and I went, oh my gosh, Michael, you're a gem. And that's what happened. You know, it was like a lovely, like playing tennis in a nice warm afternoon, and just having fun, playing tennis with each other, sending ideas to each other. And it turned out to work really well.
That's a great story. And on that, Mr. Anderson, as we say in Quebec, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. 1,000 Hands, folks, July 31st. Mr. Anderson, thank you.
Thank you. Wish you well.
Always a pleasure. Let's do this again soon.
Sure enough. Bye-bye.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.